So, funny thing about me, I used to never finish books. Past Murphy would get 20 to 50 pages to the end of a book and just close it and be like, I get it. I see what the story did. I got my story out of it. I see where it's going to the end. And I lost interest. Fast forward to me actually creating a YouTube channel to talk about books, and I realized I'm gonna have to start finishing these in order to discuss them. So I finally started reading the endings of books, and imagine my surprise when I realized that those last 50 pages oftentimes contained like a story-altering twist that was relevant to read. Oh, you're not surprised? You're actually surprised at my deplorable reading behavior? Yeah, I understand. Anyway, I've actually been finishing my books for years now, and I've found this phenomenon where I still typically don't actually care that much about the endings. And you can probably tell that by the way I review, because I usually talk about all of the content and then I'll just kind of mention the end unless that ending is exceptionally great or exceptionally poor. And I think the reason for that for me is because I find that I value the contents, the greater contents of the story more than the ending itself. So I tend to be a little bit more forgiving if an ending is a little bit disappointing to me. Like it usually won't ruin the book for me. I'll just say, I didn't love the ending, but the book itself still can make it into my favorites list. But even with that being true, there are endings that are like a symphony where everything falls into place. It all aligns perfectly with what the story was setting up to that point. The character moments, the plot, the twist, it all just kind of ties in amazingly. And then there are times where it feels like, you know, a couple of bad notes, a couple sour notes have been hit, and then the whole thing just sort of fell over. So in this video, we're gonna talk about endings, what makes them great, what makes them terrible, and maybe a little bit of why I don't put as much value on most endings. So, what makes an ending fall short? The thing with a great story is that a lot of times we feel a connection with the characters and the world itself. The journey that we've been on with these characters has started to feel like our own. We get personally invested in it and we care about where it goes and where they land and what state the world is left in at the end. So, a lot of times, as put by Liz Ryan, the absolute worst ending can be those that make everything that's been established feel completely pointless, like making everything a dream, imaginary, or forgotten, so none of it meant anything, or undoing or failing to complete the character arcs, not in a way that's meaningful or intentionally tragic, just in a way that's frustrating and makes you wonder what was the point in the first place. When everything is undone or everything is forgotten or it turns out that nothing was real, not in like a thriller, unreliable narrator kind of way, but in a like I woke up from a dream kind of way, it leaves the world and the character arcs feeling like nothing has changed by the end of the book. It's all exactly the same, and therefore the journey that we went on, the things that we got invested in, were actually worthless. What was the point? Was my time wasted? Stories can have great impact on us, the reader, so when the story itself feels like it had no impact, then it almost feels like we've been cheated of the impact that we thought we were experiencing at the time. There's also great need in an ending for falling action. I've read many books where we get to the climax of the story, we get to the big battle, the big confrontation, the big thing that this all has been building toward, resolve that thing, and then cut, turn out the lights, close the door. Which, again, continuing with the point that reading is so personal and that we get so invested in things, that feels a little bit like we haven't been able to process, like we haven't been able to grieve or to get past the offense that's happened. I've seen it in all kinds of genres. You can have a great battle where people die and the world is still completely upended, and then we cut to characters smiling and laughing, the ones that are still alive, characters smiling and laughing, and then, you know, we move. And I'm left there thinking, okay, well, but the world's still broken, so who's gonna clean that mess up? Or a romance where you have this big explosive fight, horrible things are said and done, and then it's time to end the book, so we just resolve with the two characters coming together and then cut to happily ever after. And I'm like, I'm still mad about what was said. I'm still not okay with what you did, 3 days ago. I'm not even in this relationship, but I've gotten invested in it. I've spent my time experiencing this whole thing, and now you're just over this? Not having the appropriate time to emotionally process and grieve and see some of the cleanup that's inevitable after some sort of big event can leave the reader reeling and feeling unsatisfied. On the flip side, you can also have the opposite, where a story is so overly clean, where the ending of the story actually overstays its welcome. It tries to tie up every loose plot thread. It tries to give a happy ending to every remaining character and heal every wound so that there's no more lasting trauma, like naming your child after an abusive figure in your life to show that you've forgiven them and reconciled the sacrifices they made for us all, and all's well, rather than allowing the character to have a nuanced feelings about a nuanced character that both causes terrible emotional harm while also sacrificing so much for the greater good and having complicated feelings about it. That's not enough. No, we have to heal it all off page and slap a band-aid on it so that we can all feel warm and cozy at the end. Another ending that can be tricky is forced character actions. Sometimes you get to the end of the book and the world's on fire and there doesn't seem to be a way to resolve it in character or in world, so characters just start acting against their nature, against everything that's been built up to that point, so that they can do what they need to do to get the ending that needs to be got, or there's like a deus ex machina or something, some sort of plot thing that just shows up to resolve things so we can get to the end. I probably don't need to explain why that feels messy. It just feels like there was no ending, so we just threw an ending there. Which leads us to the good. What makes an ending extraordinary? Going back to that community post, this sentiment came up over and over and over again, and that's that the ending fits the themes. Glassflower said, consistency. You can really sell me anything, be it happy, tragic, or an open ending, as long as it stays true to the themes of the story and wraps up the character journey in a way that makes sense. And that really complements what we said in the last book about forced endings, forced character choices, or forced plot devices. If the ending makes sense for everything that was set up before this, if the seeds were laid very early on for the problem that they're going to come up with, or the solution that will be provided, if thematically the story has been bringing up the same point throughout the story in different ways from different angles, and then it all resolves to something where seeds have been laid, where characters have kind of been inching in that direction anyway, and where thematically what happens in the end ties into what's been explored already throughout the novel, that to me, and it seems like to a lot of people, is that symphony. It doesn't have to be a happy ending, a tragic ending, one where everybody dies or nobody dies. There really doesn't have to be a set rule of what the ending looks like, as long as it feels honest to the story. I think that that is the most important thing. If the ending feels honest to the story, then you could even sell me on an ending that doesn't fit my preferences. Great example of that would be Something Wicked This Way Comes. Something Wicked This Way Comes has an ending that I don't even like. In fact, I think it's cheesy. When I read it, I was like, ugh, but it fit everything that this story was building to. It fit all the themes that were being introduced with family, with loyalty, with devotion and sacrifice for one another, as well as with this overarching feeling of good can overcome evil. That was all throughout this book. Then you get to the end and it's like, okay, yep, this was written for young readers, and the ending, it sure does feel that way. But I can't be too mad about it because it fits what this story was and what it was doing. It didn't feel like a cop-out. It didn't feel false to the story. It didn't feel dishonest. It felt like what the story was doing. Still love this book, by the way. This is a great example of a book that I didn't like the ending. It's still on my favorite horror list. Like, I just loved this book. Night of the Mannequins. Sorry, these are two books that I just read last month, and so they're fresh on my mind, and also I just really loved both these books. Night of the Mannequins had a shocker of an ending. It had a surprise ending that was like, what? It's one of those books where it's easy to kind of miss what exactly happened in the ending, but when you read the line that exposes what was going on this whole time with the mannequin, it's like, ah, there were clues everywhere. There were clues all throughout the story to indicate that that scene at the beginning, that's what was actually happening here. And because there were clues all throughout the book, if you read the book closely, then by the end, when it says what kind of like alludes to what happened, you have to put the pieces together. When it alludes to what happened, then you just go, wah! Or at least I did. I went, wah! I think Abercrombie is also a great example of an author that is a very honest storyteller. His big writing point is it honest? He can write something flowery, he can write something pretty, he can write something that sounds nice, but is it honest to the story? That's the question that he asks himself when he's writing. And I think in every Abercrombie series that I finished, which is oh no, I've done 3. In every Abercrombie series that I've finished, which is 3, by the time we get to the end, there's always something that I'm like, okay, I could move that around, that character thing that happened, okay. Like his endings are never exactly perfect for me, but they're always surprising. They don't go in the direction that you would just, they're gonna go in. Like Frodo was always going to be able to destroy the ring. That's the correct end for the Lord of the Rings. And a lot of times with Joe Abercrombie, he doesn't give you the correct end. Like you don't get to the end that you should expect to be getting to. But thematically and for the character, for what's been set up, it makes sense. It works even though it was shocking, which is, I say all that to say, it doesn't have to be obvious for it to be honest. And finally, I only have 2 things to say about what makes an ending extraordinary, because to me, what makes an ending a symphony isn't a list of rules or a structure to follow. As we already said in this video, it can go in so many different directions. It just needs to be honest. And then for me, and this might be a preference thing, I like my worlds to feel living and breathing. I like my stories to feel alive and not like they're following a plot that must be fulfilled. So for me, the second thing that just makes an ending feel like perfect to me is when it feels like the story keeps moving, the characters keep living after I run out of pages. So that might mean that not every single question is answered, or that might mean that not every trauma is resolved at the end. There's still work to do. The world isn't done yet. The world isn't perfected. The characters they haven't reached the end of their arc yet. They've just gotten closer. And I don't mean open-ended in like a, hey, there's room for a sequel kind of way, but in a way that feels like the world will keep moving and living even after I've stopped reading. Those are the best endings to me. But back to me being a bad endings reader. To me, the ending isn't everything. There are endings that can ruin a book for me, like if it feels forced or if it feels like things are just hand-waved away, things that don't feel honest to the story. But generally, as long as the ending fits the themes of the book and it feels like it was a natural progression to the end, shocking can still be, but natural, makes sense, and fits according to what it's been building to. Then it won't really matter if the ending fits me personally. It won't really matter if the ending is exactly what I wanted, or if I have some nitpicks, some things that I would move around, some things that I would change. That's not gonna ruin the book for me. I can think of very few instances in my reading life where I've read an ending that's been dissatisfying and I've said, oh, everything that this book did, I was loving the book. It was perfect until the end. Now I hate it all of a sudden. Because I don't read the book for the ending. I read it for the characters and their relationships, for their personal development, for the obstacles they face and how they overcome them, and how they work through what they had to suffer. Don't get me wrong, when I finish a book, I want to feel satisfied at the end. I don't want to feel disappointed and say, well, it was a good book anyway. I think the ending is extremely important to the book and to the enjoyment of that book. But the rest of the story is equally as important to me. So I started writing out notes for this video. I planned this video because I think that the ending of the book is actually significantly less important to me than it is to your average reader. And I kind of wanted to unpack why that is, not because I think I'm right, but because I think I'm weird. But in order to unpack that, I also ended up going on this journey of talking to y'all and figuring out what is it that makes an ending the exception? What makes it extraordinarily bad so it can ruin a book, or extraordinarily amazing so it can elevate the book to that status of possibly the perfect book, or perfect to me. So this video kind of evolved into a discussion of what makes endings great or terrible, as well as a reflection for myself on why endings aren't the end-all be-all for me. But I would love to hear from you. I'm sure you have different perspectives on what can ruin a story or what can make the ending perfect, as well as how valuable the ending is to you. So I'm really actually very curious to hear what you think about that. Do endings typically make or break the story? Or is it only in the extraordinary cases that they affect you that strongly? How important are endings to you? Again, I think endings are incredibly important to the story. I just also think that the rest of the story is just as important, and very, very, very rarely can an ending ruin all that I've gotten out of the book before it. But I know that that may not be the common experience for a reader. So what do you think? How valuable are endings for you, and what makes them great or terrible? I hope you participate in the discussion, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, what your experience is with endings. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I would love to hear from you. I post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday on this channel, Mondays and Fridays on the manga channel, which is linked in the description. I'll see you again soon. Bye.